Hello and welcome back to the Daily Update from the Wayne County Sheriff's Office. I'm Captain Doug Hunter, coming to you today on March the 3rd, 2019. The month of March has historically been designated as a month to give attention to severe weather here in Ohio, mainly in the form of tornadoes and thunderstorms and the like. And in just a few weeks, there will be a statewide tornado drill taking place. Now, an important part of that drill are the folks that are associated with the Skywarn operation right here in Wayne County, and many of those are amateur radio operators. Now, ironically, in Rittman on Saturday morning, the Silver Creek Amateur Radio Club held an exam for individuals who were looking to obtain their license or upgrade their license. Now, I'm going to take a little bit of time today and talk to you about the topic of amateur radio so that we could get more amateur radio operators right here in Wayne County. In fact, I'd like to see that number grow by 50 or more by the end of this year. Now, currently there are about 144 licensed amateur radio operators in the city of Worcester, about 44 in the city of Rittman, and another about 42 in the city of Warville. Of course, there are other zip codes associated here in Wayne County that have their own, but all in all, we have just a little over 200 licensed individuals here in Wayne County. We'd like to see that number grow. I'm going to talk to you today about the process for becoming licensed as an amateur radio operator. Now, it's not really all that difficult. You have to pass a 35-question multiple choice test centers around the use of the amateur radio, obviously. Now, I want to tell you that while it's not difficult, you're probably going to have to put a little bit of time in studying for the technician level test, which is the lowest tier of the three tiers that are available. There's technician, general, and extra class, and each test becomes increasingly more difficult. Now, I don't want you to be too concerned because there have been individuals as young as 8, 9 years old that have passed this test. But again, depending upon your expertise on amateur radio law, electronics, and the like, you may have to put in more or less time to study. Now, the studying process is very simple nowadays. You can go online, and there are a number of online tests that you can take, as well as books that are available that will help you, guide you through this process. Now, realize that while the test is 35 questions, it is not 35 questions, every question the same all the time. The 35 questions that you're going to be looking at when you go to take your test are taken out of a pool of over 400 questions, and the questions that you receive will probably be different than the questions that the person seated next to you at the exam table would receive as well. So the next test here in Wayne County is going to be in June, again hosted by the Silver Creek Amateur Radio Association, and it's going to be given again at the Rittman Library. Now, this past Saturday, 3 individuals took their test. All 3 were fortunate enough to pass. They were there for different levels. Again, we have the technician, general, and extra class. Now, the technician class is the entry-level class, and everybody that becomes a licensed amateur radio operator has to first obtain the technician class license. Now, that license will allow you to operate what's called a 2-meter or a 70-centimeter type radio, and these are radios that are actually very similar to the radios that have been used in law enforcement for many, many years. Typically, they're line of sight radios with a radio-to-radio range of 5 to 7 miles. However, here in Wayne County, there are 2 repeaters that are available, and a repeater is a device that's mounted on a tower that allows your radio signal to be amplified. In short, you're transmitting on one frequency and it hits the tower, and the tower rebroadcasts that signal on a different frequency at a much higher power. So it allows you to talk essentially 25 to 50 miles away, depending on the conditions and the location of the station that is receiving the signal. Now, oftentimes when I ask people about ham radio or amateur radio, they oftentimes will say, well, yeah, those are those guys with all those antennas on their cars and stickers, and it looks bizarre and so forth. And I know exactly what you're talking, but the fact is, The majority of amateur radio operators, their vehicles do not look that way. They may have just one single antenna that allows the radio in their car to transmit. In fact, most of these individuals tend to kind of fly under the radar. Now, in my contact with these people, many of them have information technology, IT backgrounds, electronics backgrounds, and the like, and they like the hobby from the electronic standpoint. And there are other individuals who are involved in this more as a preparedness for the emergency. In fact, the FCC stresses that the amateur radio frequencies are primarily for emergency type use. The majority of the clubs around Ohio will have informal, what they call nets, usually in the evening, where their members will essentially test their equipment. They have a net control operator, and people will check in with him. It's a way for them to test to make sure their equipment is working. Those nets are available here in Wayne County. The Silver Creek net takes place on Tuesday nights at 7, while the net out with the Wayne County Club takes place on Wednesday nights at 9 p.m. Now, what's neat about this is even if you do not have an amateur radio, you might have an older police scanner, or a new scanner for that matter. You can tune your scanner to these frequencies and at least listen to what's going on. Now, the operation of a ham radio station is not very difficult. Once you become licensed, you're going to need to get a radio. The radios range in price from less than $50 on up is for a 2-meter type radio. And a 2-meter car radio, which is what most people will be using, looks just like this. It's nothing too elaborate. It's small. It hooks onto your battery in your car, an antenna on the roof or on the trunk, and you're good to go. Most people who are operating a 2-meter radio in their home are using a radio similar to the one that I just showed you. It's not really a base station radio. The antennas, again, people talk about the antennas utilized for ham radio use, and they associate these big antennas that they see mounted in somebody's yard. Sometimes people will say they're an eyesore, and there's no way they're going to have that type of antenna around their home. Realize that the majority of the time when you're seeing a very large antenna, those are for what's called HF or high frequency use, which are the people that have the general or the extra class license that essentially are letting them talk around the world. But even at that, the majority of the people with those licenses do not have the large antennas like we're talking about here. Most of them will have an antenna that is nothing more than a wire strung between some trees. It's called a dipole style antenna. In fact, I have one of those at my own home, and if you drove by, you would not even notice the antenna was there. So you were probably driving by many amateur radio antennas on these high frequency radios, and you don't even see those antennas. So do not let the antenna situation scare you away from being involved in this. Again, a 2-meter antenna is typically about 19 inches in length, so you can make one of those out of a coat hanger if you know what you're doing. Now, that is one of the joys of this hobby, is many of the amateur radio folks will make their own antennas out of different materials. I made my own 2-meter antenna really out of a piece of copper pipe that was salvaged when my neighbor was redoing their bathroom. Works very well, almost nothing in it. This mounts outside my home, and it works very well. Of course, there are commercially available antennas available for purchase, but a lot of people tend to like to make their own antennas out of something like copper pipe or scrap wire, anything like this, and they work very well. Okay, here in Wayne County, we've got about 144 individuals licensed in Worcester, 42 in Orrville, and 44 in Rittman. And again, I'd like to see that number grow, not only for the Skywarn portion of things, but for general safety. Realize our cell phones depend on other technology to make them work, and these radios are simply radio to radio. We do not rely on any other infrastructure for our radios to work, short of the repeaters, which extend their range. But even if the repeaters are not there, we can still talk radio to radio, although it's going to be shorter distance. Now, the different tests that are available for the general and extra class, those tests become more difficult, and of course they will allow you to talk on more powerful radios or radios that have greater range and will allow you to talk around the world. But don't fret. If you're interested in talking around the world, you can do so with your technician's license by using some of the new digital modes. And our modes called DMR, which is Digital Mobile Radio, as well as D-Star, and another system called System Fusion. All these are somewhat proprietary in the way that they're used, but a DMR radio, for example, you can get that for less than $100. It essentially works, it relies on the internet to make these round-the-world contacts, but for less than $100, you can be talking on a radio and making contacts in faraway countries if that's what you're interested in doing. So I want to urge you to take a look at it. There's many websites available for amateur radio use. As far as studying for the test, you will have to put a little bit of effort into it, but I would say for a technician level license, if you study every evening for a couple weeks, you'll be ready for your test. Now again, the next test taking place in June of this year in Rittman. I'm looking for about 50 people who want to step up and get on the airwaves with those of us here in Wayne County that are licensed amateur radio operators. If you're interested in doing that, if you have questions, reach out to me. I can help you. I can connect you with people who are actually much more knowledgeable than I am on this topic. But it's very enjoyable, and it allows you to have an emergency form of communications that many people simply do not understand even exist, much less possess. So that is what I have for you for today. Remember, as always, to think a little more of others and a little less of yourself. And things will be a whole lot better right here in Wayne County, Ohio.